This is TWiT.
The proposed Patch Act, a new bill designed to prevent occurrences like WannaCrypt. And I'll explain what it is and give some background and why I think it's a total crock. Okay, so Security Week reported on this, and it was picked up from additional coverage, but basically a repetition of what is known, which is, there is a bill now. So Security Week writes, following the worldwide WannaCrypt ransomware attack that leveraged the Eternal Blue exploit developed by and stolen from the NSA, Microsoft's chief legal officer, as we discussed last week, and quoted Bill saying, called for governments to stop stockpiling zero-day exploits. His arguments are morally appealing but politically difficult. Now, however, writes Security Week, he has partial support from a bipartisan group of lawmakers. And there's a bunch of them. Senators Brian Schatz, who's a Democrat from Hawaii, Ron Johnson, a Republican in Wisconsin, Cory Gardner, Republican from Colorado, and U.S. Representatives, those are senators, U.S. Representatives Ted Lieu, Democrat in California, Blake Farenthold, Republican in Texas. Schatz announced yesterday that they had introduced the, quote, and this is where PATCH is an acronym, actually, Protecting Our Ability to Counter Hacking Act.
Oh, please.
I know.
They must spend more time on that than the actual bill, I swear to God.
I know. Well, just wait, because, it's so useless of 2017. Its purpose is to establish a vulnerability equities review board.
That already exists. Obama set that up. Didn't work.
Exactly. With permanent members, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Director of the FBI, whoever he is, the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of the CIA, the Director of the NSA, and the Secretary of Commerce, or in each case, a designee thereof. Its effect will be to seek a compromise between the moral requirement for the government to disclose vulnerabilities, and then in parens, Security Week writes, Microsoft's Digital Geneva Convention, and the government's political expediency in stockpiling vulnerabilities for national security and deterrence purposes. In a statement issued yesterday, Schatz wrote, quote, striking the balance between U.S. national security and general cybersecurity is crucial, but it's not easy. This bill strikes that balance, codifying a framework for the relevant agencies to review and disclose vulnerabilities will improve cybersecurity and transparency to the benefit of the public while also ensuring that the federal government has the tools it needs to protect national security. Okay, except that, if what they're suggesting is that Eternal Blue should have been made public 5 years ago, obviously there would be huge NSA pushback against that. So anyway, continuing, the bill does not go so far as to mandate the disclosure of all government zero-day exploits to relevant vendors for patching, but instead requires the Vulnerability Equities Review Board to develop a consistent and transparent process for decision-making. It will create new oversight mechanisms to improve transparency and accountability while enhancing public trust in the process. It further requires that, quote, the head of each federal agency shall, upon obtaining information about a vulnerability that is not publicly known, subject such information to the process established. In this way, the Vulnerability Equities Review Board, it's hard to even say that.
That exists, by the way, so this must be some sort of update to this.
Right. Has oversight over all zero-day vulnerabilities held by the government agencies. It also maintains the controls relating to whether, when, how, to whom, and to what degree information about a vulnerability that is not publicly known should be shared or released by the federal government to a non-federal entity. That is, whether the public interest requires the vendor be able to patch the vulnerability.
It's a balancing act, obviously, because if you're going to have spy agencies, they're going to collect these.
Well, and my take is this is total nonsense. A bunch of politicians who want to appear to be responding by creating more government bureaucracy, which is exactly, by the way, what our present administration was elected to reduce.
Right.
This will simply add regulation without effect. The CIA and NSA will loudly and probably honestly assert their need for these for national security. They will downplay the downside and explain how we are already losing the cyber war and how forcing voluntary disarmament would be unilaterally laying down our arms and capitulating in the cyber war. They'll argue that foreign governments who lack the Patch Act's attempted oversight controls will still be free to discover and use the very same software flaws against us. And that, as we have seen, even when patches were already made available, machines were still victimized. That is, Microsoft patched this in March, and this happened, 2 weeks ago. And they'll also note correctly that Microsoft only back-patched XP and Vista because of and as a result of the proven severity of the problem, which would argue that if they had informed Microsoft, oh, by the way, here's an SMB flaw, Microsoft certainly would have fixed the OSs that are widely in use and recent, but would never have bothered to fix XP and Vista. They did that only because it was such a problem. So that argues that even informing Microsoft of bad problems doesn't guarantee that all of the machines online will get fixed. So I would argue that this is just bureaucracy with no effect.
I think there has to be some discussion. I mean, unless you want to abolish anti-terrorist efforts, I don't think it's unreasonable for the government, for the NSA and the CIA to stockpile exploits, right? I mean, we're not saying that. And then it's also reasonable, and I think the NSA knows this full well. It was the Director of National Intelligence who set up the original vulnerability equities process in 2008. They understand the risk also of holding on to these. And so I think it's not inappropriate for some group of people who represent both the public interest and the interests of the intelligence community somehow hash this out. I mean, otherwise you just keep everything.
If it comes down to money, and as we know, so much often does, then if nothing else, maybe this okay. And if putting more money into protecting the secrets would have prevented that leak, then maybe that's the solution. That is, the fact that the NSA lost something that generated headlines that has been such a huge problem. If they needed more money in order to, a budget in order to further and better secure their secrets, that's what they should ask for.
Yeah.
And
that's
get
the solution. Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, it's just as hard to make perfect software as it is to make perfect spy. And I think this is real world. There's no obvious right answer, but I think it's appropriate to try to find an answer. I'm not sure how this differs from the existing vulnerability equities process, but
Well, and a bunch of guys sitting around saying, "Oh, we found a really juicy one. You know, we need to keep it." How is anyone going to say no? Right. You have to tell.
There was some evidence that Heartbleed was the NSA knew about Heartbleed for several years before it was discovered. It never leaked out. It was discovered.
Yep.
Do you want? I mean, these are tools the NSA uses not for. One of the things is this is generally, as far as I know, not ever used for mass surveillance. It's used for targeted surveillance.
Because they don't want it to get out.
Right.
You know. Yeah. So they're gonna find someone somewhere and use it in order to perform a network penetration.
Right.
And
yeah,
I think it's going the way it should. But I guess my point is the idea of this being a proper subject of a committee is ridiculous. To me, this doesn't make sense for a bunch of bureaucrat heads of departments to sit around and say, gee, you know, I mean, the worse it is, the more powerful it is. And so the more useful it is. The mechanics just don't make sense.